Good evening to everyone joining us on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. My name is Sean, and I will be your host for today. Thank you for taking the time to join us in today's panel discussion on job opportunities in the space industry organized by NTUC UPME. Before we start, let me run through some house rules. There is strictly no recording of this session, and your cameras can be switched on and off, but there should be no indecent imagery. Your microphones will be put on mute to minimize noise disruptions. We encourage you to raise questions relevant to today's topic anytime during the panel discussion, and we will try our best to address them. We will now share the video from our previous panel discussion on job opportunities in the mental health sector. So sit back and enjoy the video.
As the government places more emphasis on mental health, there is ample room for the sector to grow and to expand, especially if we compare to international benchmarks. In 2020, there were about 248 psychiatrists in Singapore, which translates to 4.4 psychiatrists per 100,000 people in Singapore. This figure is much lower than the 15 psychiatrists per 100,000 population recorded by many of our OECD countries. There is an opportunity for us to grow the sector, and the NTUC will work with the government and our industry partners to do so.
But now, in the government sector at least, there's a lot of emphasis on what we call multidisciplinary team, MDT. And that includes, as what Suan mentioned, the psychologist, the social worker, the case manager, and pharmacists, the occupational therapists, and even what we call PSS, the peer support specialists.
I guess in the private sector, I would say that more of the job opportunities will fall on being in a clinical setting. So whether you are a psychologist or a social worker or even a counsellor, you would tend to find roles in different sort of practices and you're set up there. Or you might also form your own practice to set up.
You ask me, we do have a mid-career switch from to come to join nursing force. I think that's quite a significant number.
If you don't have a related degree, you need to do at least 1 year of an honours, which is in a relevant field. So you might have to do a 4th year or 1 year psychology or honours degree. That will include research. You might then have to do maybe a 1 year or 1.5 year graduate diploma before a 2-year master's.
As long as you have an interest in it, there are universities out there that are offering counselling courses that are for people that does not have undergrad in mental health.
My therapist, she's about 55 years old. She did a mid-career switch around 40s, so it was quite nice. She feels that she has a second life and going back to school and study and all that. And I think the fun thing about her is because she has a better work-life balance in that sense. I think she works in a private one, right? So she chooses her days to go in. So I guess in a way you can help people have a meaningful job. Don't earn too little, but still, it's quite a nice job that you can actually, plan your time a little bit better for yourself.
You have a lot of other institutions like, I would say, some of SUSS, NUS, NTU, you have SMU as well, all have undergraduate psychology degrees. Now, all these undergraduate courses are your stepping stones. You still need to get a postgrad diploma or your master's course to eventually practice.
Currently, the psychiatry training program is 5 years, which means that after 5 years of medical school and 1 year housemanship, you need to complete another 5 years of specialization to become a psychiatrist. So I think that will be, say 5 plus 1, you are plus 5, that's 11 years.
I'm very happy to see that NCSS have actually rolled out this program called the Professional Conversion Program, whereby people can get themselves retrained. And this program is for the social workers. So people that want to retrain themselves and join the mental health industry, I think the social work segment is an area of need right now, and NCSS is joining together with SUSS University and together with the Workforce Singapore. They are offering this program where you'll be paired up with participating employers for the program, and if you're selected by the employers, you will be given this training whereby the social workers can train in either a graduate diploma in social work or a bachelor's in social work.
Thank you once again to everyone joining us on Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. We will run today's session with three main topics. First, we will be discussing on the job opportunities in the space industry. Second, how can one enter the industry? And finally, the challenges working in the industry and what are the prospects. Along the way, we will also answer some of the questions that you have submitted during registration. If you haven't submitted your questions, fear not, as we will still be taking in questions on Zoom. Feel free to type your question into the chat box. Now, allow me to introduce today's moderator and panelists. Here with us today, we have Mr. Melvin Yong, Assistant Secretary General of NTUC, Director of U Associate and Member of Parliament for Radin Mas SMC. As Director of U Associate, ASG Melvin oversees the PMET segment of the workforce. He also serves as the Executive Secretary of the National Transport Workers Union. And we are very privileged to have ASG Melvin as our moderator today. Our first panelist is Mr. Jonathan Hung. Mr. Hung is the Executive Chairman of Singapore Space and Technology Limited, SSTL. SSTL is Singapore's lead industry organisation focused on developing the space technology industry. As Executive Chairman of SSTL, Jonathan leads the support in all elements of space and astronautics activity in Singapore, ranging from engagements with foreign space agencies, working with space industry chiefs, and top research organizations spanning the globe. SSTL also supports a range of startups, innovators, and venture capitalists through its two deep tech accelerators and provides technical training to companies entering the industry. Next up, we have Mr. David Tan. Mr. Tan serves as the Executive Director for the Office for Space Technology and Industry Singapore, Austin, which is the central office for the Singapore government. Mr. Tan leads Austin in developing national strategy, addresses space-related matters, and identify technologies to build and grow space capabilities as an industry that contributes to economy and national needs. Mr. Tan served in various capacities within the public and private sector, such as the Brigade Commander for Air Force System Brigade in RSAF and Chief Technology Officer in ST Engineering Electronics. Our next panelist is Mr. David Gilling. Mr. Gilling is the Vice President of APAC Sales in Kameta Corporation and is responsible for all direct sales and reseller management for the APAC region. He brings over 25 years of experience in sales, executive, and business development roles with extensive experience in the satellite, connectivity, and broadcast media industries. Last but not least, we have Dr. Mark Lim. Dr. Lim is the CEO of Elena Private Limited and space expert in residence to the Darwin Innovation Hub. Dr. Lim is also an adjunct principal investigator with NTU, helming emerging topics such as nuclear fusion and geothermal systems. Dr. Lim is a strong advocate of STEM education and spends time volunteering with non-profit STEM organizations. He believes strongly in inspiring youths to continue to take up careers in STEM for them to address the challenges of their generation. Without further ado, I would like to invite ASG Melvin to give his opening address. ASG Melvin, please.
Very good evening to everyone joining us on Zoom and Facebook Live. Welcome back to our monthly panel discussion on job opportunities in growing industries amidst the pandemic. COVID-19 has permanently transformed many industries, making some jobs obsolete, but also created many new opportunities. Over the past 10 months, we have been exploring how the pandemic has transformed various sectors, from nursing to mental health, from esports to logistics, and how PMEs can tap on these new areas of growth to ride the next wave of their careers. In tonight's panel discussion, we'll be exploring an industry of literally infinite possibilities. I'm of course talking about the space industry. Some in our audience might have read about the recent space flights by Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, which brought a number of civilians, including their respective founders, into space last month. These companies aim to commercialize space tourism, and their recent success has indeed ignited the imagination of millions around the globe that space travel might become a reality in the not too distant future. I'm sure our panelists will be able to help shed more light later during the discussion on when we can all take a trip into space. But do you know that Singapore also has a thriving space ecosystem that started with humble origins back in 1992? According to the Economic Development Board, Singapore's space industry is home to more than 50 local and international companies engaging in multidisciplinary activities, from research and development to designing and prototyping satellite infrastructure. The sector currently employs over 1,000 professionals across various roles, and the potential growth in this sector is simply enormous. This evening, we have invited 4 distinguished industry experts, Mr. Jonathan Hung, Mr. David Tan, Dr. Mark Lim, and Mr. David Gerling, who will share with us in greater detail about the types of job opportunities in our local space industry, and also provide tips if you wish to start a career in this sector. So to our Zoom participants, I'm sure that many of you will have questions along the way. Do key in your questions in the chat function, and we'll try to cover as many questions as we can throughout the panel. So with that, let's jump right in and get started. So for the uninitiated, let us begin by understanding a bit more about the space industry. Jonathan, maybe we start off with you. So when lay people like me think of working in the space industry, we often only think about astronauts on board space shuttles blasting off into the great unknown. But is this all there is to working in the industry? Could you share with us what are the various types of roles available within the sector?
Sure, Melvin, thank you very much for having all of us here. First of all, just to answer the question, I think which was highlighted earlier, I think the journey for all of us to go to space, potentially even Singaporeans, has already begun. I think as you have rightly mentioned, in recent weeks, there's been news about our friends in the US that have made leaps and bounds, of actually really achieving this great milestone, of actually going to space, and these are private individuals that have succeeded. But you have to understand that really, I think that is really the tip of the iceberg. There is a whole stack that supports that entire ecosystem. So let me be the first to tell all of you that I think there's enormous opportunity, right? There's a lot of careers, right? I think that also make up this entire machine of the space ecosystem, right? So we really need a lot of engineers, first and foremost. I think engineering is a base foundation, right? And we need them from all walks of life, multidisciplinary, right? You need electronics engineering, you need mechanical engineering, you need civil engineering, aerospace engineering, actually the entire spectrum of engineering. So if you're an engineer out there and you're looking to go forth and try out this sector, I would encourage you to seriously consider, right? And seriously consider because this new space economy has also fundamentally changed. Over the past 2 decades or 3 decades ago, I think definitely the space industry in some of the larger established spacefaring nations, now they are typically driven by large government programs, and yes, you do need to have very heavy specialization, to enter some of these sectors. But today, the barrier of entry has actually reduced, right? More and more people are able to enter this new space economy, right? Access to space is more affordable and within reach. So I think the groups of folks, the different careers that make up the space sector has also widened significantly. So I talked about engineering. Of course, you have the broad-based chaps that are in different fields of science, so you need a lot of scientists as well. But you also do need other skill sets, it's softer skill sets, you need lawyers to support regulatory environments, you need medically trained professionals, and not just doctors, you also have the other subsets of medical disciplines that also needed. Honestly, there's a lot of things in zero gravity that we don't know about. So when you venture into space and go through all these unknowns, you do need a lot of people to take risks, to try new things, and I think this is where we have a lot to uncover. And again, this entire field requires, like any other sector, many folks from all disciplines, not just from the technical skill sets, but also again from other softer segments as well.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Indeed, the space industry today has grown in leaps and bounds and is filled with very exciting potential. Maybe I move on to David. The Office for Space Technology and Industry was set up by EDB in 2013 to capture the economic opportunities and build a thriving space industry in Singapore. Could you share with us how the industry has developed and progressed since 2013? There's been quite a number of years. And what role can Singapore play in this globalized sector?
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here this evening to connect with you on this favorite subject of mine. Indeed, the Singapore space journey, it's one that is quite calibrated and one that has been along the journey that is moving in a pace that we can manage. I think since the first launch of our XSAT in 2011, we were able to design and to develop a satellite that we can call our very own. But since then, satellites has shown to us that it is no longer in the domain of the rich, the powerful, the famous, and those who could. Small satellites are beginning to come into the industry to be able to show that they can provide for communications, they can also provide for navigations, and they can also provide for the whole host of awareness that are very useful for mankind. So what has happened in the last many years, as has been highlighted for us, is that we have been trying to focus on three things. Number one, to be able to identify and grow the industry in space-related companies here in Singapore. This is important because unless we have a vibrant ecosystems across the lay of the land here in Singapore, you will have to be exporting and buying a lot from overseas. For space, you need that talent to be able to grow here. And so growing that companies here to be able to find their niche in developing specific technologies that are unique and differentiated and yet can be commercialized. That's key. So that's one part of it. How the Singapore spent enormous effort to help the industry to grow in a vibrant manner. And we hope that we will be able to raise unicorn from among industry players here in Singapore. And I'm glad that it has been highlighted for us that we have more than 50 companies, both startups, SMEs, as well as MNCs and large local enterprise here in Singapore, which is flourishing. The second part of it is to be able to grow the talent from within Singapore. And we grow the talent not in just one domain, but across the spectrum. For example, we grow the talent in the university, we create touch points in the JCs, and we also develop contact points with students, even when they are very young. And we do this in the whole of ecosystems, and that's why I'm glad Jonathan is here, because we work very closely to be able to build talent touch points to the student. When we do that, we help to develop center of excellence in the universities, and we do that to be able to turn that center of excellence into satellite research technology centers or satellite technology centers in all our universities. So that's the second part of it. The third part, which is important, is to be able to develop pipelines for satellite-based development that can involve both the local industries and the MNCs, as well as drawing the strength of our universities and their students' participation. And then creating that opportunity to develop satellites that can be of use to Singapore for its national needs, as well as looking at commercial purposes that can benefit both Singapore as well as the region. So you would have heard of things like, for example, climate concern. Satellites will do wonderful things. You would have heard on how satellites can look at forestry, can look at agriculture, can look at maritime, can look at aviation. So satellites, in many ways, if you exploit it, it can expand the limitation of your physical space to a huge extent that is limitless. And that's why some people say that space is a gate to heaven. But I think it is also the doors to many possibilities for communications, for navigations, and for comprehensive awareness across business spectrum.
Thank you very much, David. So it's quite heartening to hear how the government is putting a lot of efforts to help accelerate innovation in this area and grow a globally competitive space industry here in Singapore. Let's move on to job opportunities in this sector. Mark, as an industry practitioner and an academic, can you share with us what are some of the job opportunities available in this startup space and the multidisciplinary roles that we are looking for?
Thank you very much for having me today, and I'm very glad to be able to share on the multidisciplinary roles that we have in space, and rather the space industry. Now, I think there's a strong misconception. You know, a lot of us, when we think about space, we think about going to the moon, going to Mars, colonizing other planets, and a lot of us actually wonder if there are necessary skill sets for us to go into such a niche field. So coming from both industry and academia, I'd like to say that we require skill sets from multiple domains, and what we're looking out for is the ability for engineers, I think as John brought up earlier on, to operate with various groups and think from a systems level. Right, so maybe just to give a little introduction and maybe to set the context over here, I'm from a company called Ileana, and Ileana essentially provides future mobility solutions for satellites. We allow for satellites to fly closer to Earth and allow for them to capture higher resolution images and data sets and communicate at lower latencies. In so doing, we actually empower the lives of people on ground. So space is actually closer to Earth than many of you think. Now, when it comes to looking out for job opportunities and wondering if what are typical types of skill sets that are required in this industry, now we'd like to say that we are looking out for multiple skill sets, as brought up earlier on, and I think John also shared that we are looking out for a lot of engineers. We have tons of talented engineers in Singapore. So specifically, in which domain are we looking out for these kind of engineers? Well, if I could just share a little bit from my company's perspective, while we are developing electric propulsion solutions or electric propulsion engines for satellites, we're looking out for engineers who are skilled in electrical system design, to be able to actually speak to the satellites, to be able to convert voltages and provide the power processing units for the satellites to operate in space. At the same point of time, we're looking out for skilled mechanical engineers. Mechanical engineers essentially devise the systems that we essentially will integrate and provide to our clients accordingly. So these are the two primary skill sets that we're looking out for, but it doesn't stop there, right? So even as we start to deploy the satellites in space, and this is where we actually start to revenue generate. We don't really revenue generate when we are building satellites, but when these satellites go up to space, execute their missions, and do the operations that they're supposed to do. And this is where an entire array of business opportunities or career opportunities come out for the greater audience out there. If you've been doing business, whether you're looking for marketing, even software engineering, data analytics, there are an array of opportunities for people who have been skilled in these fields to utilize the data sets. Let's just say if we're going for Earth observation and analytics for these data sets, to use these data sets to provide advanced analytics into various domains such as agriculture, energy, oil and gas, climate change, as David brought up earlier on, as well as defense and security. Now, in other aspects where communications are concerned, people who have been in the field for a long period of time also can deploy these skill sets. So I think in a nutshell, the sky literally is the limit, right? So we really need, as long as you can dream something that you can do or want to do on ground, why not think about how we can actually deploy assets in space to allow for terrestrial businesses to thrive as well.
Thank you, Mark. There's a quick question from Zoom, which I thought would be quite relevant. With the current downturn in the aviation sector, would you consider it easy or challenging for aviation workers to transit into this sector, the various roles that you just mentioned?
That's a very good question. So I think with the recent downturn of the pandemic, and I would like to share a personal anecdote of mine. So one of our space systems engineer at Eliana is actually a pilot trainee with Scoot, one of the airlines, right? And it's because of the pandemic that he actually transitioned to a space systems engineering role at Eliana. At the start, of course, naturally, he was a little bit concerned about whether some of the skill sets were rather translatable. But eventually, I think he sort of warmed up, and he is eventually developing very, very important peripherals and components that we are deploying on real satellites in the years to follow. So I do believe that there is a huge opportunity for mid-career switchers or people who are currently already in the aviation industry to want to make the switch. But the onus really is on the people on the ground, whether they have the fire in the gut, fire in the belly, and the willingness for them to transit into a different field. Because really, again, sky's the limit, right?
Yep. Okay, David, as the Vice President, as the key person overseeing Kymeta's Corporation's Asia-Pacific sales, could you share with us what your company does? Why has your company chosen to invest and set up shop here in Singapore? I think the audience would be interested to know if your company is hiring also, and what are some of the job openings that you'll be looking to fill?
Sure, thanks. First of all, thank you for having me here. It's quite a pleasure and an honor. What I'd like to maybe just to summarize, so we talked about very high up in space, a bit closer to Earth, and actually what Kymeta does is we're actually operating from the Earth. So we're a late startup company that manufactures. We developed a technology without being too technical, which allows for satellite communications, high-speed satellite communications, to be fitted on any sort of small vehicle, small vessel. So you can imagine you're going on a vehicle at speeds of vessels at speeds of 60 knots, and you're pulling data at 30, 40 megabits per second. So it's a technology that allows very high-speed data on very small mobile vehicles. So we're on the ground equipment side. I would call us a late-stage startup. We're owned by Bill Gates and primarily, but we have other investors such as Hanwha from Korea, Toyota, Intelsat, among others. So the reason why we set up here, and honestly, when I was hired, I was given a choice. I could live anywhere I wanted in Asia Pacific, anywhere. And part of the reason why we set up in Singapore, in addition to the, say, historical advantages one has as a non-local company setting up here, is the amount of focus the government is putting into developing the space industry here. And so we know as we'll grow our business, we'll have a talent pool that we can address. So right now, we're still fairly early, so I have hired an engineer here, but who wasn't from the space industry, incidentally. So he'd been working with UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, like drones previously. But what was interesting for me and what I'm looking for primarily, be you an engineer, a salesperson, any skill set, is an embracing of change, embracing of innovation, and a passion. And again, I see a lot of that in people I meet here at different functions. So I think, yeah, just in general, Singapore's been spot on for where we should set up.
Thank you very much, David.
Sure.
I'm sure both Kai Mehta and Eliana would see a big jump in Google searches this evening. So next, a very common and highly popular questions from our audience. What are the salaries like? Right. So maybe Mark and David, both of you are in the industry. Could you share what is the expected salary ranges for some of these jobs that you just mentioned? Perhaps, Mark, you would like to start us off first?
Sure. And I would like to share that as a young startup, we don't have Bill Gates backing us. So, it's extremely challenging for us to pay very, very competitively with large space primes. We simply do not have that kind of deep pockets. And of course, if you're asking us to match the salaries that SpaceX is offering to their junior engineers, it's going to be very tough, and it's an unfair advantage that many of these large corporates or MNCs have over us. However, I would like to say that we still are able to compensate very fairly, right? We always believe that we will need to take care of our engineers, because our engineers are our true people who actually build the technology and grow the company together. So our starting salaries that we offer are very competitive for fresh graduates. And on top of that, even though we may not be able to offer very high salaries as compared to large corporates, what we can offer is compensation in terms of equity and shareholdings. And in doing so, we can attract and retain top talent and incentivize them to grow together with the company, so that when the company grows, they grow together with us, and we can build a large venture together, and we can, perform well on the international stage.
David?
Yeah, I mean, what I think, about compensation. So I've been in the industry since the mid-90s, which is quite a bit of time, I think. And at some points in my career, I was making more than friends who were investment bankers, and at sometimes I was making a lot less. And it's an industry that has its ups and downs, and sometimes you're loved, sometimes you're not loved. As an industry, I can say probably when you started your David, when you started what you're doing in 2013, right? Space technology wasn't particularly loved. And it was very difficult to find money, to get investment. Yeah. And now, where we're at today, we're $5 billion into a $50 billion rotation over the next 5 years going into the space industry. So I would just say the following. About salary, if going in either as equity, getting your compensation through equity or through salary or commission, whatever it is, you're going into a growth industry. Yeah. And you have to look at it from that point of view, that if someone said, you're going into coal mining, it might not be, a huge growth potential. But this is really, I think even though the industry has been around since the 1960s or even late 50s, in reality, we anticipate a massive, massive growth over the course of the next 10 years, and that should just keep going. So for me, I would just say, if you're contemplating the industry, you'll get your rewards either in the short term or long term. That I'm quite sure about.
Thank you very much. I think certainly beyond salary, it is also important to know that we can expect a good career progression in this sector, especially it's growing. Jonathan, in your role as the executive chairman of Singapore Space and Technology Limited, you have interacted with many professionals in the industry. Could you share what is the typical career progression for professionals in this sector?
Sure, Melvin. I think in the space sector, the career progression or the entire career journey is actually not very different from actually many other sectors. So I think first and foremost, please don't look at the space industry as something unique as a career. Right? First and foremost, if you are passionate about it, you should join the sector, and actually, compensation, salary aside, stay the course, right? And I think a lot of our companies here have demonstrated it. I mean, amongst the, I think our members of the panel are being very humble. Of the 34 or so startups that are under our wing today, including some of our friends here, generally, actually, if you have deep domain expertise in what you do, you can bring value to a company. You're definitely valued, overall, right? And I think the compensation will follow. Career progression as well, in the technical side, or if you're in management, both follows a similar track. But let me put it this way: the progression probably would be a little bit more accelerated. I find it's timely also to be looking at the sector, right? Again, because of this entire revolution of the space sector, things are moving a lot faster, quicker, more adept, and I think companies are starting to see that. Just like if you use a parallel in the tech industry, for example, the disruptions are happening so quickly, right? The space sector, no different as well. Yeah, so I think this is something that you can expect if you stay the course, and the companies typically in the space sector, if you can project are doing well, then you're in good hands.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Now that our audience has a general sense of the types of jobs available in the sector and the career prospects, let us move on to the next burning question. How exactly do I get my foot in and enter the space industry? Let's start with the technical roles first. David, could you share what is the government's vision for our space industry, and what are some of the educational pathways that our young students can take in order to gain both the technical as well as the technological qualifications needed to enter the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I want to begin by saying that the satellite has three key components. The space. One is up in space, the satellite, which is payload, and its ability to be able to bring up into space and survive the environment in space and to do its work, be it communications, be it Earth's observation, to do it from a distance in an instant to pass the information down on Earth. That part of it is the space segment. But as you know, when satellites are up there, you can't talk to the satellites direct. You need a ground segment. And this is another part of the industry that you built the ability to be able to connect the satellite in its passing at the right time for the right choices of satellite that you intend to be able to exploit all the information that is going to bring it down in a timely manner, process it, and then be ready to distribute. So that is the second part, the ground segment part. The last part of it is to be able to take from the satellite, receive it to the ground, and now creatively provide an expansion of the services for mankind. I can tell you that you don't have to be an astronaut to get into the space sector. If you are an engineer, if you are a scientist, if you are a technologist, if you are mathematicians, and you like to play around with the deep sciences, yeah, it's available. But if you are in hardware and software, and you are in the mechanical and the engineering part of it, you can get involved on the ground side of it as well. The last part of it is you can just be a simple data engineer or even a data scientist that likes to look at data and enjoy looking at data and splice and dice data and then create the opportunity to be able to provide services and think out of it. Today, our lives are so connected to satellite that when we wake up in the morning, we use satellite to tell us how is our weather. We use satellite to order for our food ahead of time. We use satellite to travel, to get for navigational direction. We also use satellite to be able to communicate. Now this is important meaning to say that there is a wide spectrum of services for as much as you can think of to exploit satellite information and provide it as services for the population at large. Even if you own plantation and you want to be able to observe how your land, how your plantations are growing, satellite provides a service. If you can splice and dice those data and then provide it as a service to the various companies, you will be in engagement. You can be employed and you will enjoy that kind of work. So there are available for the industry. This is one part. The second part is for students. You are still studying and you're looking for opportunity and you may have some fanciful idea about satellites. Be involved through the Institute of Higher Learning. If you're in the universities, go to the lab, go to the Center of Excellence in NTU, NUS, in CRIPS, the Center for Remote Imaging and Sensing and Processing, or to NTU for the Satellite and Research Technology Center, or even in NUS for STAR, the Satellite Technology and Research Center. They have programs, they have projects, they are funded nationally by Austin, for example, and they have opportunities for interns, they have opportunities for you to be able to get involved in the projects at the right time, at the right skill sets, and you can come in. At every level, there is an opportunity, and from each level, you can grow to be able to move from the Earth, from the space segment to the ground segment to the services. So, opportunities are plenty.
Thank you, David. I think beyond technical roles, which you have quite extensively elaborated, I'm sure the sector also hires many non-technical professionals. I'd like to ask our other David, what are examples of non-technical roles that are available, and whether coming from a non-STEM background, would that be a barrier for someone to enter the sector?
Yeah, sure. As far as background, I have a degree in Russian studies and economics, which doesn't sound like, other than knowing about Sputnik, doesn't have a ton to do with the space industry. The guy I hired in Japan, who has a degree in international studies and Japanese as well, and while he was in the space industry about 18, 20 years ago, he went from that to technology to running a craft beer business. And I hired him in spite of, knowing his mind. Oh, well, the mic works better. I hired him, and it's interesting when we're in meetings, everyone, we talk about the technical and everything, then I say, you know, John used to, or he was running a craft beer business. Everyone's like, oh yeah, let's meet him. So the excitement actually comes from his beer background, not the fact he was doing satellites before. But what, and when I was starting in the industry, there was a company called Bellcom, and the guy running that was a publicist for Jimi Hendrix prior to getting into satellites. So what I'd say is what I see in space industry is a collection of nearly successful musicians or creative types who aren't talented enough in it, so we go into satellites and space industry instead. But to be, in terms of non-STEM roles, it's important to have also background in a multicultural background, understanding how to be effective in, because space, if you can imagine, one satellite in geosynchronous orbit covers 1/3 of the planet. So if you're doing business just in the geosynchronous, you have to operate in many multiple cultures. And so the ability to be fluid culturally, to speak in cultural languages, to understand what time means in Jakarta versus time means in Switzerland, right? So there's rubber band time in Jakarta, and then in Japan, you won't even be 1 second late for a meeting. And so it's an ability to translate what you're doing from a business point of view across multicultures, and also understand that even though we talk about space and rocket ships and all of these things are doing what? They're doing some kind of job. And some kind of job that's relevant to us. So earlier in my career, I was focused primarily on television broadcasts. No one was thinking, oh wow, there's a satellite that I'm getting that I'm able to watch Mad Men or whatever. No, people weren't thinking that. They just think, oh, what's this program? But behind it, there was a spacecraft. And it's the same thing with what's going on today, is anything that's done in space has to have a relevance to what's going on in the Earth. And so you need to be very multidisciplinary. You need to understand what's going on with disasters, with climate change. How does space technology, how can that be an optimal solution for some of the problems that the planet faces, both from a ecological point of view, from a commercial point of view, a socioeconomic point of view. And all of that, having a STEM background is good, but you certainly don't need that.
Thank you very much, David. It seems like almost anyone with a certain interest can consider joining the industry. Jonathan, someone from Zoom asked if there is an age barrier to transitioning into this sector. Is the sector open for mid-career PMEs to join? Are there any bridging programs for mid-career switchers to take in order to transit into the sector?
Well, definitely no age barrier. Only thing is, I guess I would say is don't take too long to make the switch. We are actually an industry that welcomes everyone, from really all spectrums, right? We encourage the youth, the coming out of our universities, our polytechnics to give it a shot, because we're always in need of fresh ideas. Actually, that's very important because, in the space sector, as you look at new satellite capabilities, things that you can do on the ground, what's the latest trends, what's the latest satellite applications, what's those blockbuster ideas, that people can have, right? That can have value to like our friends in Kaimeta and Eliana and the other companies, right? They're always looking for new ideas. So I think that is a fundamental, right? We also need guys with deep domain expertise, and that's where we need guys with heritage, with the wisdom. You can't use the word old because it's not good, but you need the guys there with the experience, because honestly, experience also counts, right? And there's no real bridging program per se, right? But I think you do need to also understand what is that specialization that you are intending to go into in the satellite field. As our friends on the panel have mentioned, there are many elements of the satellite, right? You could be an engineer, a mechanical fella, you could be delving into the electronics of the subsystems. So I think very importantly, if you have some background already from the beginning, you should refresh those areas. If not, I think that's where you can also pursue maybe a course, for example, that allows you to deep dive into some of these areas that can allow you to enter whichever company or so that you are planning to engage with. So again, it's quite open. You don't need to go for a brand new degree, for example, just to enter the sector. And I think most importantly, I think that bridging component requires you to be very flexible. In a lot of the space companies and satellite companies today, when you go in, you expect A, but things change so quickly again, and you might be doing B. So I think if you're able to be flexible, and adapt quickly, I think again you should be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, maybe if I could just add to what you were saying, that if you definitely need an ability to pivot quickly. So that's one of the key factors that I've seen in this industry. And again, you can go from being an expert in broadcast television to data transmission to military sales, and you just need to pivot. If you have that in your nature where you like change, you embrace change, and you welcome change as a very positive thing, I think you'd find the industry very rewarding.
Mark, you have experience with people from other jobs joining your company.
Yes.
What do you think is one of the more important thing that they should know before making the switch? Or one of the attributes you think it will be very useful for someone planning a mid-career switch?
That's a very good question. So I think one of the most important skill sets that we are looking out for is being adaptable, willing to change, and being very keen to learn something which is out of your comfort zone. You know, we always say that adversity breeds innovation, and when you're thrown into the very deep end of a pool and forced to struggle and to come up with novel solutions for certain problems, I think the experience that some of the experienced PMEs actually bring to the table offer very fresh perspectives in allowing for companies, young and growing companies, to be able to scale in terms of manufacturing, optimize processes, and making them a little bit neater for prospective customers for them to view the companies in a better light. But I think one of the other things that will be very important is that we emphasize very strongly that the engineers who join us or mid-career switches, they need to have fire in the gut, they need to have a lot of tenacity, and they have to be forward-looking. Because if we are looking at solving the challenges of the current generation, the problems that we have today, understanding that the developmental cycle in space is extremely long, by the time we come up with a solution, we might have already missed the boat. So someone who has good acumen in looking into the future, understanding the trends in space, understanding that these are the problems that exist 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We work on it today, and by the time the tide has turned 5 years later, we already have the solutions, we know how to deploy them, and we can go and make some money.
Thank you very much. David, one quick question from a Zoom participant. Is there already a skills framework for the space industry? If not, are there any plans for the government to come up with one?
Okay, I'm not too certain what skills framework it is referring to, but all I can say is that the opportunities exist both in the industry, particularly among the startups, SMEs, large local enterprise, and MNCs. They have many segments tied to space-related activities. That skills segments that you have can be fitted and can be found. That's one. If you are the type that prefers to work in the lab, the university and the research institute has a spectrum from the very top end of the scientists to the engineers and to the lab. For those who are interested to be able to have hands-on tools, be it in the mechanical side, in the engineering side, in the electrical side. Again, the lab provides an opportunity. And there is always these rolling projects that comes around that involve universities that takes in at least projects that will last for at least 18 to more than 18 months, in order to find completion. So that is a very loose framework. It exists, and if I may add to what has been asked previously, what does it require from you? A hunger for discovery and an appetite for innovation. With these two, you are on the road for success into the space industry.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone on Zoom for your very interesting questions. You can keep the questions coming as we now move on to our last topic for tonight. What are the challenges working in the space industry and the career prospects? Mark, as the CEO of a startup, could you share what are the challenges that you face or your startup face in the space industry here in Singapore?
Well, there are numerous challenges, and if I were to share on every single one of them, I think I will spend the entire night over here. But just to summarize, this comes in just two domains. The first will be in funding and support, and the second will essentially be in competing globally with space primes and large MNCs and corporates who have already established and entrenched themselves in the industry. So in the first domain, let's just talk about funding and support. As a space tech startup, it's very challenging for us to keep the business sustainable, especially at an early age. Space technology, it's expensive. You have to spend money on expensive equipment. You have to spend money on qualifying your systems even before they go to space. Then there's a space segment where you actually fly your satellite and qualify that in space. And then you're ready to market your products to a global audience. So apart from that, talent does not come cheap as well, right? So essentially, it's extremely challenging for a young company to raise capital with no street cred, with no legacy, with no heritage, with just a brilliant idea, and to convince investors within the region or internationally to fund your startup. Now, there are ways to get around this, right? Of course. And we are extremely appreciative of the support provided by our local space tech ecosystem. We have SSTL with us, we have Austin with us, and they have been fundamental and instrumental alongside our institutional supporters from, let's just say, Enterprise Singapore, our IHL ecosystem. I was from NTU, and they provided the environment for us to gestate to a point where we have systems which are mature enough for commercialization before we venture out further and to bring our ideas from sketch to scale. Naturally, again, it's extremely challenging to raise funds simply because within the region there are multiple companies to fund, and as compared to, let's just say, a software startup, a fintech startup, a healthcare startup, or even a property startup, they don't burn as much cash as we do. They have very shorter runways before they can revenue generate, right? But as long as we believe that we have the capacity to bring an idea to reality, where we are solving real-world problems and challenges with assets deployed in space, coming from Singapore, making our mark internationally, I think we present a very strong case. And we thank Austin and SSTL for their kind support, again, in allowing for us to be where we are. The second domain will be in locking horns with large corporates, let's just say space primes, the Airbuses, the Boeings, the SpaceXs out there. We are small companies, right? And of course, we naturally do not have the sheer capacity, the manpower, the infrastructure, and everything that's required to provide an end-to-end vertically integrated solution to revenue generate, and to be a sustainable business. But this is where I believe we in Singapore as startups can thrive. We have to identify strategically domains that we can do well on a global stage. We in Singapore are not in a position for us to charge and tackle all domains at one go. We have to be strategic, and the fact that we are nimble as a startup allows for us to pivot, and this is a word that we've been using a fair bit, very quickly and respond to the new space ecosystem where clients are more demanding, mission requirements change. We can pivot so quickly and customize our approaches to deliver what the customer wants in a matter of weeks. Decisions can make in a couple of days, where in larger corporates, this could probably take months of ding-donging around, or even years before they can even realize or pivot their business models accordingly. So I believe these are where our strategic advantages are.
Thank you very much, Mark. I have a few questions right now coming quickly in from Zoom. I think one of the question is this a male-dominated sector? What are the challenges for females aiming to join the space industry? I presume the audience see all guys here tonight, right? So maybe, David, you want to share that?
I mean, it's true that engineering in general historically is male-dominated. Having said that, the first company I worked for, ComSat, the CEO, the president was a woman, Betty Allewine, and last year I had the pleasure of meeting Gwen Shotwell at the SpaceX party, and she's certainly not a man either. So, in general, what we've seen is parts of the space industry's been male-dominated, and part hasn't. So, when you're looking at broadcast and that side, it's been fairly 50-50. If you're looking at space exploration and the like, in general, it's been more male-dominated. But I do see a big change in coming. I mean, the partners I'm working with now, I just had a meeting with a partner in Indonesia, and that's led by a lady. My partner's in Brunei, so it's a lady running that company. So I mean, in general, it's, I mean, SSTL, I mean, we all know Lynette, and she's quite a force of nature. And I think it behooves the industry to diversify, not strictly in skill sets, but also in backgrounds and where people are coming from. And I certainly don't see a reason why women shouldn't be more involved in the industry, and I do see a growth in that. So yeah, from a historical point of view, very male dominated, but recently I see more and more women taking very key roles.
Mark, do you see that happening as well?
Yes, most definitely. So glad to share again. So I'd like to share that, in fact, for our pioneering interns that we have at our company, majority of them were females. And in fact, we have seen a lot of ladies actually applied as interns with our company and following on into careers as engineers with us. A very good example will be one of our engineers who will be going to the University of Southampton in a couple of weeks' time. She interned with us for about a year at Eliana before pursuing her passion in systems engineering with Eliana as a full-fledged engineer. So I would like to say that, for the space tech industry, especially for new space, we are highly inclusive community. We look past gender, we look past race, religion, and therefore we always believe that as long as you have an idea, as long as you have a passion to put something onto the table, for us to translate something into effective solution that can address the challenges of tomorrow, we want you. I think that's what we're looking for.
Jonathan, when I visited your office, you were the only male, if I recall correctly. Well, how do you see the industry transforming? Has what both David and Mark said, that more and more females are joining?
Melvin, you have a very good memory. Yeah. So yes, actually first and foremost, I think no offense to the male, dominated panel of which I'm on as well, but I think in the past decade or so, and I think actually even acutely in Singapore, yes, we're seeing more women stepping up, and being part of the industry. From the youth chaps, we run the Space Academy Singapore program, and I'll tell you the first female, the first top cadet, of our program, youth, was a young lady. Right, and we have seen so many of them come through, and they take part on an annual basis. So we see the statistics of more and more young female engineers actually attempting to go into the sector, and they do well in this. Number two, I think, honestly, I think the guys just need a breath of fresh air, So, I mean, they come in with a different perspective. And perhaps that also is one of our differentiations here in Singapore, because you're right, coming from, when David was sharing, historically, globally, yes, many men are in this field, because, in the past, you need astronauts who are military officers, who are pilots, test pilots, and, all these guys came from a very male-centric domain, but today the world has changed. Yeah, I mean, it's cliche as it sounds, it is the truth, right? And we have people coming from different walks of life. So when you talked about, and we covered that earlier, I think in the segment, but beyond even the technical skills. So technical skills, you already have very good female engineers, which make a difference, right? And then you have the other element, which traditionally, whether it's a mixed bag, of males and females, you need people who can communicate, you need good program managers, you need good general managers. The CEO of my organization is a lady, and I mean, you need them to support, the entire ecosystem as well. And not just support, but in some cases and in many cases, they are also leading, right, these companies. In many of the successful space companies globally today, there's actually a pretty strong woman. So actually, David from Kymeta was right. I mean, SpaceX has a lady behind the entire force. Operationally, as the president and CEO, she runs the entire company, right? And it's the same for many of the larger space primes that Mark had also mentioned. So certainly, I think we welcome, it's an equal opportunity sector for sure. And actually, we do welcome and we want to encourage all the ladies and the female participants, to consider the space industry.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for just one final question, and I think we should let the government representative have that. How can small or smaller countries like Singapore continue to punch above our weight amongst the bigger players? And we have heard that coming out quite often this evening. In this sector, and create opportunities for our local workforce. I think the one question that came out really is it even possible for Singaporeans to become an astronaut one day?
That is a dream that can come true. But I just want to say that, as I've said in the early start of this session, that space allowed us to break beyond the limits of our geographical boundary. Think about what Singapore has done. We are a global hub in many ways. The aviation and the maritime hub alone combined together contribute more than 10% to our annual GDP. It is not just an airport, it is neither just a seaport. It is a transit global hub. It is a global transshipment hub. We have been able to stand on the global stage because we make that difference and do it in a way that is sustainable for us to put ourselves on that global stage. Space will be able to allow all our hubs, be it aviation, maritime, financial, data, information, legal, everything, to go into that global space where ground-based capability cannot allow us to reach there on time, to reach there accurately. Space allowed us to connect from a distance in an instance, on time, with the right people, to be able to be ahead of everybody else. This is key to us. And I think we should continue to make space to be the hub of hubs so that we can connect globally and transcend across all of this pandemic so that we can assure our supply chain, our business line, our continuity. I'd like to close with one quotation from George W. Bush. He says this, and I was quite encouraged. Mankind is drawn to the heavens for the same reason we were once drawn into unknown lands and across the open seas. We choose to explore space because doing so improves our lives and lifts our national spirit. I'd like to add, for Singapore, the only options for us to stand on the global stage is to be able to have connectivity, connectivity, connectivity.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for joining us online tonight. And thank you all for your wonderful questions. Special thanks to our panelists for taking time off your very busy schedule to be with us this evening. I'm sure our audience has gained much valuable insights about the space industry and what it takes to tap on the vast opportunities that the sector has to offer. The space industry is truly an exciting frontier with unlimited possibilities, not only for the future, but also for the present. Many of the technological innovations that we have adopted during this pandemic, such as remote learning, remote working, and even telemedicine, are powered by satellite communications. Such space-related technologies enable us to keep connected with our family and friends, even though we may be physically apart, just like what we are doing this evening. The sector has supercharged itself in recent years with investments on the rise, has enthusiasm surrounding the industry, and commercial space travel continues to grow. Analysts are expecting the space economy to reach $1 trillion within the next 20 years. Based on what we have heard tonight from our panelists, Singapore is in a good position to become the region's premier space hub, and we need more professionals, more Singaporeans to fill the many vacancies available in this sector. So if you are contemplating a career in the space sector, but wish to have more in-depth one-to-one guidance on how you can transition into the industry, do write to us, and our career coaches will help you with your career information that you need. To conclude, I'd like to thank everyone on our panel, Mr. Jonathan Hung, Mr. David Tan, Dr. Mark Lim, and Mr. David Gerling, for sharing your insights with our viewers this evening. To all our viewers, I'd like to thank you for your strong support over the past 10 months. You have made our panel discussions a huge success, and I hope that our discussions will help you in charting a fulfilling and exciting career ahead. With that, we have come to the end of tonight's session. Stay safe and good night, everyone. Thank you very much.